My name's Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive at Hamilton College. I'm very, very pleased to have Rob Mounsey today with me, and I'm going to describe you from my research papers that surround me that you have to be one of the busiest guys in the music business.
I I don't know about that. I'm not that busy today. It's just you and me.
Oh, I had a question, so I'll ask it anyway. Uh,
Hmm.
when we're done here, do you have an assignment that you need to get back to? A writing assignment?
Uh, a couple things coming up, but not pressing. Still being discussed. Yeah, a production job, and a few other things, little arrangements.
What kind of um, parameters go into the discussion? Is it budget? Is it recording time?
Yeah, it's sure, but I mean, budget's always an issue, which I tend to leave to my manager and try to avoid talking about money. Um, but yeah, it's schedule and what exactly is needed, and how can I help supply what's needed, and what's missing. What can I contribute? You know, what would someone like me to contribute? What do I feel I can? And are we, on the same wavelength? I guess the older you get and the more years you put into it, you're more and more interested in working with people you enjoy working with, and that's a big factor.
It leads me to a question I had. And in all your work, have you had instances where people want you to write horn parts or string sweetening, and you get a track to listen to, and it's so busy already that you just have to say, there's no room here? Or do you figure out a way to contribute?
Uh, that can happen. That can happen. I can't think of too many occasions where that happened. I mean, usually if people want something to be um, added to that way, there's usually room somewhere. Sometimes there isn't a lot of room. I lived through a whole era years ago where people wanted orchestrations on everything, say in the late 70s, early 80s, and uh, big record companies and big producers felt like they just wanted it to sound expensive. You know, they wanted it to sound like they spent money on it, which is, I guess, probably not the best reason to be doing that. I'd rather it be done for musical reasons and not just because we want it to sound like we spent money. Um, there's usually a way to add something. Sometimes there isn't a lot of room, and what you add is kind of minimal.
Have you ever been in a situation where you look at your score and you say, they hired two bassoon players and I hardly have anything for them. I should give them something to play.
Interesting, you should choose the bassoon. I love the bassoon. I mean, I love the bassoon in the orchestra. It's a wonderful instrument. Um, uh, I do a lot of orchestral pops arrangements for Cincinnati Pops, Boston Pops, and other orchestras, and for events where they accompany singers. Uh, and I love the orchestra madly, but I think it's very important when creating those things to give every single person a reason to be there, you know, and to put in front of that second bassoonist a part that musician recognizes as a bassoon part, you know. This is a part for me. It makes me sound good. It makes me feel good. It lays nicely on the instrument, displays an understanding of the registers of the instrument, and Now I know why I missed all those baseball games as a kid because I had lessons and I was practicing. I have the highest respect for those orchestra musicians, especially the string players who are all my heroes. If you can play a violin or a cello or a viola and make it sound beautiful, I take my hat off to you because those instruments are so insanely hard to play. And they deserve to have parts that make sense for them and make them sound good and make them, remember why they do this because they love it and because they sound beautiful doing it. The pops orchestras, I'm getting away from your question a little bit because this is not so much about recording as about live performance, but those pops orchestras have to confront a lot of really terrible arrangements.
It sounds like you avoided um, the things that some of us have experienced. For instance, your first time writing string parts, and the concertmaster looks over his glasses and said, "Young man, the violin cannot play a low F sharp."
That actually happened one time, and I was very embarrassed. But the only I know how a violin is tuned. The only reason it happened was because there was an arrangement, and someone at the last minute demanded that it be transposed down a semitone. So we ended up with a G flat in the violins, and David Nadian, the brilliant concertmaster for the Philharmonic and a great concertmaster in hundreds of sessions, was laughing at me a little bit. He knew that I knew better. He said, Rob, we are not violas. We cannot play this G flat. We aren't. Of course, I was humiliated. It was because there was a transposition, and didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't proofread it, and
And you probably resisted saying, "It's not my fault. I knew better."
it was my fault. I did know better, and it was my fault. I should have proofread it and adjusted it. But it generally no, generally no. I know how the instruments are tuned. I know what the ranges are. Um, so yes,
Okay.
the pops orchestras when they do special concerts, uh, accompanying pop singers and so forth, sometimes they'll bring in very poorly written arrangements that were, it's the bass player in the band or something. He knows the chords and knows more or less what the registers of the instruments are, and they see some really terrible arrangements
I'm going to
where
take you back.
everyone.
Go ahead. I'm going to take you back for a minute to, I'm going to say 1964. Were you listening to AM radio pop music?
At that time, I was kind of a little classical music snob, and I wasn't really. I thought I was just above all that pop music stuff. I was a little skinny little music nerd with glasses, and I was learning to, I had learned to read music by studying orchestra scores. And when the Beatles broke on Ed Sullivan, I just thought, oh, that stuff is not for me. But privately, you know, I was hearing the Meet the Beatles over the backyard fence and thinking, I kind of really like the way those guitars sound. And I kind of really like that John Lennon singing that's so vinegary and thin and like it's kind of sounds good. And I like the way the cymbals sound on the drum kit. It's kind of cool, but I wouldn't admit it at the time. And later on, there was, um, uh, Stevie Wonder and Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and then it's just started opening up.
I'm wondering if there was, you made me think of George Martin. And did
Mm.
you take note?
My favorite Beatle.
Your favorite Beatle?
Hmm.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And these things enter your mind. Like I remember listening to Little Eva and the, Carole King, the locomotion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I go, and what is that sound? And I think there was like two tenor saxes playing in fifths or something. Wah.
Mm.
And they go in here, and later on, you use that for something
Yeah, yeah. Steal from the best.
from the best.
Yeah.
Has your work changed? Um, I'm leapfrogging, but I remember talking to a fellow at Eastman named Dave Ravello.
Hmm.
I went to his house, and in his music room, he's got the big score pads,
Hmm.
yellow King score pads.
Hmm.
He insists on writing in pencil.
Yeah.
And do you miss those days, or how has it affected the way you work?
I do miss them a lot. Excuse me one second. Um, I just happen to have some right here. 30 staff paper. Um, yes, I the process has changed and I'm not real happy about it. Um, it used to be always pencil and paper, finish it, fold it in half, put the title and the date on it, and send it away to somebody, to a copyist who would then write the parts out by hand. Um, Definitely come from that old school. And nowadays, I type stuff into Sibelius because they just want me to deliver PDFs. So I deliver PDFs of scores and parts. Since I have to type everything into the score, I can't make myself write it all out longhand in pencil anymore. So for big orchestra things, I generally make a six staff sketch, which is, you know, double staff woodwinds, brass, and strings, and whatever other little notes I put in there. Sketch everything out because the most important thing is to have all of the bars, all the bar numbers, all the rehearsal letters, any extra double bars to demarcate phrases between rehearsal letters. And, but I'm sketching out all the ideas, a lot of the voicings, especially the counterpoint, because counterpoint's really, really important to me. And that has to really be worked out. So it really works. So that's all in the sketch. And then I type into Sibelius and I work out most of the little details as I'm typing it in and throw the sketch away.
No, no, have to save it.
I'm sorry, they're gone. The sketches are gone. I have all the files. I have all the Sibelius files and the PDFs.
Right.
So there's no information lost. I can't make myself believe that the sketches are going to be in the Smithsonian someday. Like someone's going to care. I doubt it.
Well,
There's,
that's arguable, but do
yeah.
you do your scores have an architectural look to them?
Well, um, I think, I think any good score does, eh, in my opinion. And that it's funny you should say that because when I was a kid, that was one of the big motivators for me. I I encountered orchestra scores and little Calmus miniature orchestra score, those little green books. And I was just so attracted to the way they look. I love the way they look. Like, because as you say, they kind of look like architectural drawings or like these beautiful blueprints. And it's like a code. I know that it's a written code for a musical experience, which is a completely different experience. And I was just so fascinated with how they look, and I remember feeling like I want to learn how to make these. I think I can make these, you know.
And you did at age 17, is that right? I see you got let's see,
Hmm.
BMI Student Composer Award.
Yeah, that was quite a moment.
I'll bet.
It
Um,
flew to New York City for the first time. And there was a little. I was just in a daze, but I met uh, Norman Dello Joyo and George Crumb, Robert Schumann. You know, a lot of very famous contemporary serious composers, concert composers, who I barely appreciated. And I was already interested in jazz music and in all kinds of popular music. But yeah, I had been writing this crazy orchestra music from age 11 or so at that point. Um,
Can you define crazy for me?
well, it was very, very, um, well, it was juvenilia. I mean, it was pretty bad, but it was very imaginative and very far out and very experimental. Experiments of all experiments of all kinds. Experiments in polyrhythm, polytonality, and crazy orchestration. Um, and I was just learning by having fun with it and studying any other scores I could get my hands on.
I don't know if you can answer this, but this, of course, when you're 17, this is pre Sibelius, etc.
Hmm.
So you're writing this score. How much of it can you actually hear in your head?
That's kind of hard to define. I mean, generally, yes, I can hear it in my head, but not really in detail. You know, it's not the same. It's not the same. I remember being a child and hearing very vividly mu music, hearing it mentally as if it were playing in the room. I think that ability of the brain kind of lessens as you get older. Um, it was, but I never heard any of that music. I still have that score, actually. It's close by, that won that award in 1970, I think it was.
Were you
Uh,
surprised when you, maybe surprised isn't the right word. What was your reaction when you first heard it played by the orchestra?
Never heard it played. I've never heard it played. It's never been played.
I
Would you like to play
would,
it? Yeah, you can put the orchestra together. It's really pretty far out. It's never been played.
how, I'm a little confused. I thought that if you had, got a composer award that some orchestra would have played it.
No,
Oh, well,
no,
that's,
no. The board, the composers read the score and said, we'll do that. We'll give this one. We'll give this kid a prize." I was the second youngest that year. It's for anyone in the Western Hemisphere up to age 35, and I was 17. There was one guy younger than me. He was 15, and he won the prize for a piano piece called Advice from a Caterpillar, which I thought was one of the greatest titles I've ever heard. I loved it at the time. I not that I heard the piece, but I loved the title.
well, you might have just answered my last question.
Mhm.
So I'm going to go there. If you had an unlimited budget and the time to pursue it, what would be your dream project? So maybe you'd want to hear that piece played.
I don't know. Maybe, maybe. You're putting an idea in my head again, which is that I could, you know, electronic production is sophisticated enough now that I could make a pretty good mock-up of it. And I hadn't thought about trying to do that, but that would be interesting.
Well, I think you should start that about 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Oh, okay. After a nap. At, at this point, yeah, it need a nap first.
Well, you weren't into pop music in 1964, but you got there. And
Yes.
I'm wondering about as a keyboardist, were you required or felt you were required to keep up with keyboard technology in order to keep working?
Yes. Well, it might not have had to have been, but I was very interested, and you know, I jumped on that little bus pretty early. The first synthesizer that I ever bought was an ARP 2600 with the patch cords, rainbow patch cords. Now, it was in 1977. Uh, I was just interested in whatever the possibilities turned out to be. And for a while in the early 80s, I was working a lot as a studio musician from the time I was about 24, 25. So I became one of those synth guys. I had, you know,
Do you have a DX7?
I had two DX7s. I had a Prophet 5, a Roland Jupiter 8. I had an old Oberheim 4 voice, which was a kind of a big kludge of an instrument. And then I had a whole lot of other outboard modular stuff that I could patch into. And about 5 or 6 road cases. And I became one of those guys where cartage guys would schlep in all these cases for a day, and you'd set up in the control room and do synthesizer overdubs for a day on people's pop records and productions. And
Did you take them without really knowing if you were going to use them?
sure,
So a
just
producer might say,
take everything.
we need this kind of sound. That's what we want. And it's like your job is to make them happy.
Yeah, yeah. You just take everything, set everything up, and you might end up like just making a couple little ooh, like just a couple little noises. And that was the day. But in those days, you could watch people throw untold scads of money at pop records, and people were making money making records, and they were used to spending that. Those days ended with a crash.
About when?
Late 80s, I'd say. It just People realized it wasn't necessary anymore.
And did you then make a concerted effort to redirect your talents to wherever the money might be?
I was never motivated by money. I have to admit, yes, to the occasional disapproval of some family members. Um, I just wasn't motivated by money. The synth thing went a little bit out of style, but also the technology meant that all of that analog equipment kind of became replaced by digital plugins. And now I have a setup which is quite small and simple with loads of software. So that technology changed a lot. And if people want me to overdub sounds on their production, they can just email files to me. I'll do it in my own little place and send them back. And that happens pretty often. I know a lot of studio musicians that, especially guitarists, for some reason, they become very adept at home recording. So, and guitarists, they have not only 17 different guitars, but also every kind of guitar-like instrument, the ukuleles and the Mexican cuatros and the baglama saz and the Brazilian, um,
Reggae or something like that.
uh, cavaquinhos, the cavaquinhos and the different banjos, the tenor banjo, the 5-string banjo, the pedal steel.
Okay.
And so they collect the microphones and the preamps, and they can do everything at home now. And a lot of playing musicians are very, very adept at all of that and they can do great work at home.
I know Randy Brecker mentioned that. He
Yeah.
gets things in the mail and
Yes.
yeah, overdub solos.
Yeah, he does quite a lot of that. I've done that with him, with my buddy Steve Kahn, guitarist. Steve and Randy are close, and I know Randy well. Steve is a buddy of mine, and so Bob Mincer, I think, is another one. Um,
Can you recall a studio date, a keyboard date where you came in and said to yourself, wow, this is going to be a real challenge for me for one reason or another?
yeah. Um, well, my favorite story about that is the Steely Dan track called "Glamour Profession," where I played a piano solo. This is the only time that I ever was a soloist for them. Uh, I don't know. It's this Steely Dan fanatics know this. This is a famous thing.
Okay.
Uh, and you're not one of them, I sense. But anyway,
Well, I am, except that what
yeah.
you played, I couldn't hear because the
Oh,
Zoom,
oh, just Zoom cut it
yeah,
out.
Zoom doesn't really like it. But yes, I'm a huge Steely Dan fan. Yes.
Okay. Well, there's a piano solo, and they called me in to play the piano solo. This was automated B in New York. It must have been 1982, I think. And they were famously very, very exacting, which nobody ever minded because everybody loved the music and loved the songs. And we got the piano solo in a couple of hours, maybe 2 hours, which is pretty good for them. Two punches, it's 12 bars. We carefully made that. And then, to my surprise, Donald Fagen said, now we just need you to just play comp a little bit through the rest of the track because we don't want the piano to just appear out of nowhere. I want it to kind of be part of the band. So just, okay, that didn't sound too difficult. So they played the track, and the song, if you remember it, is very harmonically strange. It's very harmonically unsettled. It's sort of constantly making left turns.
That's a great word for it. I've never been able to pin down how that song makes me feel, and you just did it.
Oh,
Unsettled.
it's yeah, it harmonically sort of doesn't come to rest. Or you think it's coming to rest and then it jumps off and goes somewhere else. And so that was strange. But I mean, if you're just reading chord symbols and just kind of comping, that shouldn't be a problem. And yet they rolled the track and I tried to just, play a rhythm comping part in whatever way felt natural at the time. I couldn't I couldn't find it because the track sounded so complete. I might have been the very last thing to be added to it, and the track sounded really finished. It sounded finished and it felt finished, and I couldn't whatever I played rhythmically. It's everybody was basically rhythmically playing a one bar pattern, not two or four, one. And whatever I played, I felt like I was stepping on somebody else. So I had to go into the booth and say, let me just really listen to the track. And I had to try to listen really analytically. Like who's playing what? Who's playing on what beats of the bar? And what I came up with was nobody was really playing right on beat three, except the kick drum. And there's a very simple drum pattern. It's kind of bop, like a just quarter notes. But aside from the kick drum, nobody was really playing right on beat three. So I went back out in the room and tried just playing on beat three for a minute and ended up feeling like three and. This goes one, two, three and, one, two, three and that started to feel strange, but it was strange, but it started to feel good, actually. And then, so if you listen to that track now, you'll hear a lot of the track is the piano will just sort of play two eighth notes on the third beat. And it's weird, but it kind of worked and it sort of added to the personality of the song. You know, it added to this kind of little bit like reggae disco feeling of the song. And then there are a few other little things, a couple little decorations here and there. But so that was a challenge. And, you know, it wasn't a challenge because it was difficult in any technical way. It was a challenge to figure out what would work.
Figuring out what would work. Uh,
Mhm.
this when I read your credits on here, your says that you collaborated with Donald Fagen on the horn parts.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to imagine how that works. Do you sit and listen to the track and you both trade turns like humming something, or here's a spot, let's put something in here?
Uh, what it mostly meant was he'd play it for me, and sometimes he would actually dictate certain parts to me. And other times he'd just say, just fill this in with something good, you know. Uh, for instance, in the song IGY, I think that's the opening song. Ba-ba-da-da-da, in B, in B. If I turn this up,
Yeah, I can sort of hear that.
oh, okay. Well, that thing, that's all Donald. That's Donald's thing. But then it goes from B major as it goes into the verse, it has to pivot into F minor, an extremely remote modulation from five sharps to four flats. And he didn't know how to get out of that line. So I figured out that was me. You know, pivot on the G sharp note, make it an A flat, and then play a G natural next to it. And then you're indicating F minor, four flats. But that was the kind of weird stuff that was not that natural to him. And he used to say to me, you know, I could do this. I don't really need you to do this, except it would take me 3 months and it takes you half an hour. He was right. He could have done it himself, but I was faster. It was, you know, it was, to me, it was like sort of at the center of how I heard stuff and saw it. And for him, it was, you know, he was writing all those great songs.
Well, you've solved two of my Steely Dan personal questions already today.
Hmm.
Thank you.
What?
Were you in the ad game for a while?
Well, yeah, we all were.
Yeah.
You know, all the studio musicians generally uh, made money by playing on TV commercials and radio commercials, and that was a huge business in the end of the 70s and the early 80s, especially if you could write the stuff and arrange it, and if you could pass as a background singer and sing on them. And that was the way people made real money in those days.
Yeah. I just did an interview with Ann Phillips, and she talked about that.
Mhm.
Um, did you ever work with the ad person? And I remember Micah Benny mentioned something about trying to do a commercial, and the representative from the ad agency is saying, "Can't you make it more yellow?" And have you had circumstances like that where you've got to determine, figure out what are they talking about?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There are a lot of funny stories about ad people who are sort of drunk with power and how much money they're spending on you, and believe that they understand music, and they don't. There are lots of those stories. The weirdest one that ever happened to me was there's a 30-second commercial where there's supposed to be a big lift about 10 seconds into the 30 seconds. And so we made a piece that makes a really nice bright modulation, a key modulation. It gets bigger, the low end goes down, the high end goes up, and it modulates in a bright direction. And it was working great. And the ad people are saying, I love that part. I love that part where that happens. And and uh and we're saying, yeah, it works really well. And they say, can you make that happen at the beginning? No. Why not? It, it's hard to explain, but the reason it works is because of what came before it. And if nothing comes before it, it won't be there. It like you think it would be obvious, but it's not that easy to explain. And then they won't listen to you. You're just a musician. Why should they listen to you? I mean, they're the people wearing the suits and the ties.
Yeah. As a producer yourself, sometimes I wonder if you have trouble zipping your mouth in a session because like you know that something should be done differently and but it's not your role to say that.
Well, if I'm producing a record, it is my role to say that. I mean, it's like being the director of a movie. If I'm the producer, and I think,
But if you're not,
but
uh,
if, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, there are all kinds of producers. There's no licensing for that job. So some are really uh, very, very knowledgeable, competent, and know what they want. And many others are, famously, the jokes about record producers are that they don't know what they want, and they're just kind of flailing and hoping something happens. You know,
and when
I
it does, they'll take credit for it.
well, sure. How many record producers does it take to change a light bulb? I don't know. What do you think? Is the joke.
Okay.
But they're not all like that. And I have to say my friend Russ Titleman is not whatsoever like that. I've done a lot of stuff with him. You're familiar with that name, maybe. Um, he's an old friend of mine, and he's the only guy who could ever do something like I was playing a chord as a synthesizer overdub, and it was a little bit of a thick, sort of jazz adjacent kind of chord with a lot of notes in it. And he walked up to my left ear and he said, "What's that note?" He very softly sings a note. And yes, it is in the chord I'm playing. And I say, "Oh, that's the G natural. It's actually the 13th." He says, "We don't need that note." And he was right. And I didn't play that note. No, he was exactly right. We didn't need that. And I was pretty impressed by that. But he was a musician. He doesn't really play now, I think, um but that he should hear a note in the chord and tell me to take out the most sophisticated note because it wasn't appropriate. I don't know anyone else that could do that, actually.
I'm always amused by when studio musicians forget that they played on a particular recording and
Yeah.
you point it out to them and they go, like Bucky Pizzarelli, for instance, hundreds of things. And he says, oh, I saw John tell him once, like, you played on that, Dad. He goes, so I'm going to see if you can remember
Uh-huh.
one of your own tunes. Okay, but the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to see if you recognize it from this.
Okay, hold on. I need to. Ba-ba-da-bee, ba-ba-dee, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ba-ba-dee, ba-ba-da-da-da-da-da. Hey, it is very familiar.
Yes, it's a little slower. It's got a very funky bass line,
Oh yeah.
and the name of it is.
Uh, uh, Miss Downtown.
That is right. You get to move on to the next round.
That was that. Wow, how'd you find that thing? That's a that was an attempt to write the theme song for Sex and the City.
Which you did later. I mean,
No.
you didn't.
Well, I did a lot of kind of I contributed a lot of scoring music to it, but they were looking for a theme, and that was my submission for the theme, which lost. I I think it deserved to win. I still think it deserved to win.
I agree because it stuck in my head all the way home in the car from my office. It was da, da, and
Mhm.
it was fun to transcribe. I only did the first 8 bars, but
Yeah.
um, I wonder. It made me think. Do you have a personal? I'll call it a pass fail metric for your own tunes. Work on something, and is it there's some level that it has to pass for it to remain a work for you.
Uh, well, I can't say that there's one particular standard or level. I I I, I guess I I guess I feel like you're always making a lot of small choices. When you make any musical piece, you're making hundreds of choices. And you just you just kind of make them inch by inch. Um,
I think the reason I ask that is because I listened to a number of the selections from Hallucination Box,
hmm,
and they're all hooky.
hmm.
Um,
Thank you, I think. No, no,
yeah,
actually,
hooks are good.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes multiple hooks. If you think of songs you remember as a kid, like
Hmm.
My Girl's got like one
Yeah,
hook after another.
yes. Great
So
song.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, some of those were attempts to make some little scoring pieces, and some of them were just for fun. So a lot of them are very short. They're just kind of little fun experiments. Um,
do you have an
so
opinion about the way music is delivered to listeners now?
sure. I mean, you know, it's horrendous how little creative people are paid for streaming. I mean, it's virtually nothing, and it's a terrible problem. But it's been a terrible problem for years that we used to sell physical units of stuff and now we don't. And trying to persuade people to buy some physical product is really difficult when you can pretty much hear everything streaming somewhere. So, I mean, the problem is much bigger than you and me. And I have I don't have any solutions.
No. Well, to be specific, why are the songs from Hallucination Box readily available on YouTube? Did you do that?
No, I didn't do that, but I do get internet royalties, which have been going up a little bit, as modest as they are. Um, So I, I I can't speak very intelligently about any business uh, issues. I'm not good at it. Um, I think I have a fair knack for putting one note next to another note. But that's I'm still doing that. That's about as far as it goes. I defer to wiser heads when it comes to the business stuff. I don't understand it all that well. I do have a digital distributor that makes sure that those albums are available on Apple Music and what used to be iTunes and so forth.
Okay. Was there a moment early on when some of these, have you mostly worked in New York? Is that correct?
Mostly, but
Okay.
also in LA and Nashville.
Were you familiar with some of the players like Bucky and Joe Wilder and those guys from an earlier generation and go to a session where you arrange the music and there they are? And what did that feel like?
Great. It felt great. Joe Wilder, I don't know. I worked with Bucky exactly once, and that was on a record, uh, Lyle Lovett's remake of The Summer Wind, produced by Russ Titleman again. And Bucky plays it's a, sort of like a small big band and a live string section of all things, of only violins and violas. A small, it was supposed to kind of sound like a big band, but it's only about seven horns. And Bucky was just great. Uh, Great guy, but I think if you look up that record, Lyle Lovett, Summer Wind, uh, you'll hear his quarter note rhythm guitar featured a lot, and it's so, you know, the rhythmic pocket is just so wonderful. Um, and I wish I had known him better. I know John. I haven't seen John in a while, but I know him. You know, father and son are fabulous.
Yes. Do you have I'll call it a backlog of available things you've written? Some opportunity comes up, someone needs a theme,
Yeah,
and you can go through your work and say, this might be perfect.
yeah, yeah. I have some stuff like that. Um, Thanks for reminding me. I should keep up with it.
How do you organize it?
It's in a folder on my desktop. I, you know, and once in a great while, I, have made contact with some music supervisor or something and say, well, I have some tracks that could be licensable and, oh, that's nice. Send them. And I send them and then I never hear from them again. And that's how that goes. I mean, in theory, they could use the stuff and never tell me. I don't know. I don't think they would do that, but you never know.
This is a timely question, I think, with the way the business is going. But when I look at your list of credits and all the things you've done, is there a sound that people know you by? I think the reason I'm asking, I watched an earlier interview with you and you were
Hmm.
describing a Steely Dan thing and you had like two bass clarinets and an alto flute. And um, is there a Rob sound that people remember you for? That's part one of this question.
Um, I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. I don't think there is, and I kind of hope not, because, um, as always, really important to me to be versatile. By the way, the two bass clarinets and the alto flute, I think those were Donald Fagen's ideas anyway. Um, um, maybe you've seen some other interviews where people will sometimes say, you seem to be so versatile. I admire that. And I thought about it a lot. I realized that the versatility, insofar as I've achieved it, it's really came from fear. It came from terror because, I I knew when I was in school and got out of school, I really wanted to do music and make a living at it somehow. And I had real doubts. But I think it's reasonable to wonder, can you make a living at it? I think it's more difficult now than it was then. But I remember and I think the strategy I kind of evolved was I better be as versatile as possible and be able to go to this genre and this style and be able to live over here and live over here. And, you know, it needed to be convincing that I can live there and I belong there and understand the conventions of that style and the literature, the history of it. Um, so that versatility kind of came from, I wanted to make sure I could make a living doing it. So do I have a sound that people associate with me? I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's an excellent answer because if people do associate you specifically with something, they may not call you because that's not what they
Yeah.
want.
And people often typecast you, and for certain people, I'm like the guy who does string arrangements. And for other people, I'm the guy who does horn arrangements. And they don't know that I ever do string arrangements. They say, "Oh, you do string arrangements too?" Like that's a different thing. It's not a different thing. It's musical arranging is arranging. And I suppose there might be some people that really specialize in one thing or the other, but that doesn't make sense to me.
Do you get arranging ideas away from the keyboard or even away from when you're working? I guess I'm thinking of you've got some assignment and you've got the track in your head and you go for a walk and something comes to you. Oh, there it is. I can do that.
Yes, sure. Yeah. Did you know that the human brain works better when you're standing than when you're sitting?
I did not.
That's that's what some scientists.
I got to stand more than
Yeah, me too. And the other corollary of that is it works better when you're walking than when you're standing still. So that's, I think, why sometimes we have we we have a feeling that we want to pace around when we're thinking because the brain actually works better. So yeah, going for a walk and looking at a tree can be a great way to refresh yourself, your ability to imagine and think and feel. And as I like to say, I speak to students once in a while. I like to say, music really comes from the whole body and it comes from the whole person. It's not something that's just in your head. If you're sitting at a piano and staring at a staff, you're only in one little part of it, which can be a great part and a really interesting part, kind of like to play with the little sparkling cerebral ideas. But we all know that it's about a lot more than that. It's about your feelings, your emotions, and also the way that your body moves and the rhythmic feelings in your body. If I'm writing a horn arrangement or something, I've done a lot of stuff with write funky little horn arrangements for R&B records. And I really like to stand up and kind of pretend that I'm playing a tenor saxophone, which I don't really play. I've played a little bit, but just to stand up and kind of dance around and just listen to the track and just go like this because, it loosens up a natural feeling for what belongs there. Something that you don't really get when you're just sitting there thinking about it.
Oh, that makes so much sense. As a saxophone player, I just, oh, that. You've got that
Yeah.
physical part
It
of the playing.
Yes, it feels a certain way, and you can feel it down in the soles of your feet where they hit the floor, you know? And that if you're connected with that, that reaches people.
Do you
Mm.
do any kind of meditation or sort of downtime to focus yourself?
I I'm glad you asked that because you're encouraging me to do it more. I need to do it more. I have a great interest in Zen Buddhism, and I've done a fair amount of that, but I'm a lazy kind of practitioner. I'm just very undisciplined, but I have great interest in that. And and at to a certain extent, everything that you do can be meditation in a sense.
Um, this is a tough question, but are you an optimist about uh, the state of the state of the nation?
I'm extremely alarmed. I can't say I'm optimistic right now, except to say that all things come to an end, even awful things, like some stuff that's going on right now. Uh, uh, Nobody lives forever.
That's optimistic then. We'll go with that.
Okay, well, that's the most optimistic thing I can say.
Okay, so you have a friend who has a son or daughter who wants to do what you do, and,
Mm,
and they're 16.
mm.
Have any specific advice for them?
That's so difficult. That is so difficult. Uh, because it really has changed a lot. Um, you know, younger people ask about this, like, what of my own experience can help them as young people. Sorry, I got the sun in my face. Um, and the business is so radically different now, um, that I'm not sure that I always doubt that my own experiences are even appropriate anymore. Uh, the last time I saw Quincy Jones, he actually sort of asked me this. He said, "How do you think young people get started today?" And in this business, and I had to say I have no idea, and he didn't either. Um, because it's radically different. I once a year I talk to students at NYU. We have an event every year about putting string sections on pr productions on pop songs. I'm trying to adjust my lighting, sorry.
Sure.
Um, and some students are saying, well, I'm a singer-songwriter and a performer, and I really want to have hit records and make a lot of money. And I have to say, if you're really motivated by money, go into another line of work. If money motivates you, be a banker or something. Do music on the side. You can always do music. You don't have to do it professionally, you know, but it's too undependable. Uh, it's too much of a gamble, I think. People that do music full time uh, as a profession, I think they just do it because they really have to. That's just who they are. They have to do it. 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 And, and they're just not going to stop. It's like singers. You can, you can always tell a singer, a real singer, because they just keep singing. They will not shut up. You can't, you can't stop them. They just, you know, they're just always singing. And, that's because they just have to, or dancers or actors, you know, if you're really driven to do it, you'll do it. I there's no question that it's difficult to figure out how you're going to make a living from it. And and the scene is always changing. There might be ways to make a living at it next year that we don't know about now.
Yeah.
There are probably ways to make a living at it today that you and I don't know about, but some young people do. You know?
Yeah, some of them are writing tunes for video games. I guess that's a
Yes,
it's not new, but one outlet.
yes, yes, and increasingly viable, lucrative.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't understand much about that either. If
Well,
someone called me, if someone called me to do it, I'd give it a shot. You know.
to wrap up, can you we got a glimpse of a couple gold records on your wall.
Mm. Yeah.
You want to tell us about that?
Oh, they just happen to be over the piano. One is a triple platinum for Paul Simon Graceland, and the other one's for Steely Dan Gaucho. There's some more over there, back there. Um, Graceland harbors maybe my most heard horn arrangement of all time, uh, which is the two bar horn arrangement on "You Can Call Me Al," ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da, which millions and millions and millions of people have heard.
Oh my.
Yeah, it probably took 5 minutes to write it, and they left the credit off the album.
Oh,
Yeah, so kind of like a little bugged about that.
how did that happen? You were listening to the track and it just like you're humming to yourself. I mean, can you describe that?
Uh, Paul and Roy Halley asked me, I was in the studio with them, and they asked me, can you make a brass section play th this figure that the rhythm guitar is playing? It was one of the African rhythm guitarists. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. Um,
Ray Theory?
Ray Peary, maybe. Or there's another guy's name starts with a V. I don't know. It was just a rhythm guitar part. They said, "Can you make a brass section, play that. And by the way, we really want to have a bass saxophone on the bottom, B flat bass saxophone." I said sure. So,
Howard
no,
Johnson.
uh, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it was Ronnie Cuber,
Oh,
actually.
but the bass saxophone didn't come in till later. Is that correct?
No, I think it's in the whole way,
Okay.
unless they took it out of the mix. But
Well, all right.
and it's two bars over and over, except for the one time it's different.
Da, 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 ba, da.
Yeah, ba 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 da.
Yeah.
At one time. So we're madly counting. 36, 37, here it comes. And it was very quick and very easy, but I was so excited. I finally did an arrangement for a Paul Simon record. I was a huge Paul Simon fan, and they left the credit off the album. But it's okay. People know now that I did it for them.
I'm going to tell all my friends too.
Yeah. Well, Roy Halley made a big point of announcing that. So,
I love the fact that it starts with a rest.
but yeah, yeah. Right. One. Ba-da-ba-ba. Yes, it's rests on the downbeats of both bars.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just what the rhythm guitarist played. Just like give it to three trumpets and three trombones and a bass saxophone and make the registers work nice. I think actually toward the end somewhere it jumps up one inversion.
Yes, I believe it does.
Yeah.
Did you crack up with the video of that song with Chevy Chase and
Uh,
oh yeah,
Not really.
okay.
It was okay. So,
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Rob. This has just been very intriguing.
ah, thank you. Thanks. That's a nice thing. That's nice of you to say that. It's been fun for me. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'll just pause here and we'll say goodbye.